I just want to, the recording has started. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, we have another distinguished scholar who honored us with accepting our invitation to give us this evening webinar, which is about Shakespeare and sciences. Let me introduce Dr. Peter Starr. He is an assistant professor at the Humanities Department of Istanbul Technical University. He was born in London in 1967 and brought up partly in the Middle East. His Cambridge doctorate was on the philosopher Isa ibn Zur'a, which was in 2000. Peter's areas of interest are Arabic Islamic alchemy and Greco-Arabic studies, in which field he published Ishaq ibn Hunayn's version of Ishaq ibn Hunayn version of a balance of alternatives in translating. You said a study of man.
Yes.
Or
yes.
Yeah,
the book is called في طبيعة الإنسان.
Oh yeah, okay. في طبيعة الإنسان. In between, also in between the cross and the crescent, he is working with a colleague on a new edition of the alchemist Muhammad ibn Umayl al-Warraqi. Peter has lived in Turkey since 2004, and he is married and has a son. Okay, the mic is for you, Doctor, and we are all listening. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wafaa, for this introduction and really for the honor of being able to address colleagues and students at the University of Mosul. And today I'm going to give a new lecture. I haven't given this lecture before, on Shakespeare and the sciences. About a couple of months ago, I gave a lecture on Shakespeare and medicine, but this is an entirely new perspective.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you.
And let me share my screen and can you see the screen?
Yes, sure.
Yes, okay, so the history of science can be seen as a branch of the history of thought. And this is especially true when science was in its infancy, as in the Renaissance times, as in the times of Shakespeare, when scientific ideas were mixed with religious and philosophical prejudgments. And above all, it was a time when science owed most of its form, most of its ideas, to ancient writers of Greece and Rome, and to some extent, of course, the science that Shakespeare knew derived from what was written in Arabic and Islamic sources. Let me give an overview of science of the time. I mean, there was physics. Generally, the area of physics was under the authority of Aristotle. There was medicine, which was dominated by the writer Galen, who lived in the Roman times, and Dioscorides, similarly. Astronomy, in Arabic, he's called Bathlamius. Similarly, astrology, and geography. It's interesting that Ptolemaeus was the authority both in the area of astronomy and in the area of geography. As you know, the most important notion in the Ptolemaic idea of astronomy was that the Earth is at the center. This is called the geocentric universe. And before Shakespeare's day, some 60 years before Shakespeare's day, there was the work of Copernicus, which for the first time made widely available arguments for a heliocentric universe. But the question is, do we see that in Shakespeare or do we not? Generally, we don't. Geography and cartography. So Ptolemy not only described the sky, but also the earth with his book on geography and his early map of the world, which is in that book. Geometry was dominated by Euclid, and chemistry. Chemistry, here we have as the main authority, Jabir ibn Hayyan. In Latin, they refer to him as Jeber, but it's Jabir ibn Hayyan. Some of his works were translated into Latin in the Middle Ages. And in the area of philosophy, Plato and Aristotle are dominant. Note that there were revolutionary changes in all these areas during Shakespeare's lifetime. London, although in those times England had no great reputation for its education system, London played a role in these revolutions, especially, let's say, geography, because the English were traveling across the Atlantic Ocean, they were settling in America. So in the area of geography, the English contributed, London had its role. And yeah, where else do we see? I mean, after Shakespeare's time, the Englishman William Harvey contributed in the area of medicine. And as you know, he wrote a book which was published, I think, in 1648. Okay, so what I'm saying is that really in Shakespeare's time that there were revolutions taking place in science. And the most famous ones are this one. Notice that the book which revolutionized medicine it was published in 1543. That's 20 years before the birth of Shakespeare. And it's called On the Fabric of the Human Body. And it's a study of anatomy. And it's written by this man. You can see he's looking at you. He's called Vesalius. And he was working in Padua, in Italy. This was the center of anatomical advances in the time. The other great revolution in Shakespeare's time was the Copernican revolution. Nicholas Copernicus. He died in 1543, and he also published his famous book in 1543. Here's the revolution, and it's called On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres, his book. You can see that in the middle is the sun. So we have a heliocentric universe for the first time established. Yes, there were people who suggested a heliocentric universe before, but really established first by Copernicus, later proven by Kepler. So these are really things that are taking place and ideas which are spreading through the world in which Shakespeare lived. And indeed, when we look at the situation in England, we see some quick reaction in a few people to the work of Copernicus. So within a few years of the death of Copernicus, this man, Robert Record, he was the mathematician and physician, the doctor of the son of Henry VIII, Edward VI. He translated the work of Copernicus, and he is associated with promoting the new understanding of the world. Previously, everyone had imagined that the world, the earth was in the center of the universe, and the earth was completely motionless. They couldn't understand. Ptolemy, for example, Ptolemaeus writes that he cannot understand the idea that the earth should move. If the earth moved, we would all fall off. But the heliocentric universe presents us with the double motion of the earth, both orbiting around the sun and also turning on its own axis. And this is presented in also the work of Robert Record, but really not very widespread, not widely received in England. The exception here is Spain. The one country where Copernicus was really widely accepted from an early stage, interestingly enough, was Spain, and the University of Salamanca, which is here in Spain, began to teach so-called Copernican astronomy from an early stage, and all students were offered the option of studying Copernicus. This is an exception, however, in Europe at the time. In the area of medicine, there was also a revolution taking place during Shakespeare's lifetime. And that is this man, you can see in the picture, he is a Swiss doctor, son from a mining area of Switzerland, a mountain man. He's called Paracelsus. And he rejects the medicine, the traditional medicine of Galen. He rejects the traditional medicine, the Galenic medicine, as it was taught also by Ibn Sina. So here you have a picture of him in a famous scene in Basel, throwing the books of Paracelsus and throwing the books of Avicenna, Ibn Sina, into the fire. So he's a bit like Martin Luther. He's been compared to the Martin Luther of medicine. Martin Luther was revolutionizing religion, Paracelsus revolutionizing medicine at about the same time. We don't see references to the modern medicine in Shakespeare. Shakespeare writes quite a lot about medicine. And indeed, he was related to a doctor, Shakespeare's son-in-law, called Dr. Hall, was quite a leading doctor in England. But you don't see really references to new ideas in science and not new ideas in medicine. Here's just one reference to Paracelsus in Love's Labours Lost. He says, to be relinquished of the artists, so I say, both of Galen and Paracelsus. Now, I will talk a bit about Shakespeare's attitude to the sciences. And really, as we said, Shakespeare was living in a time of scientific change, which you know, I mean, in the same year, 1543, there was the publication about anatomy called On the Fabric of the Human Body by Vesalius in Padua. And he was proving that Galen was wrong in many places. Galen was wrong about the shape of the brain, for example. Galen was wrong about many of the details of the body. This was proven in 1543 by a new publication, and it was a revolution in science. In the area of astronomy, there is, in the same year, 1543, the publication of On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres by Nicholas Copernicus. And this whole idea was overturning so many assumptions of the scientists. They had assumed that the world was in the center. They had assumed that the world was motionless. So this is a revolution. Did Shakespeare take an interest? That's the question I will ask. Geography. The new world was being discovered. The Americas. In Shakespeare's time, this was a very important issue in England. For example, in 1587, someone Shakespeare knew, Sir Walter Raleigh, was sponsoring expeditions, ships to go to America to try to settle colonies. Later, he was trying to find gold in South America. So Walter Raleigh was very interested in expanding knowledge in the area of geography and cartography, map making. And we will talk a bit about philosophy, and my conclusion will be, can you see these pictures, by the way? 3 is a year of revolutions, isn't it? Even this book was called On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres.
Okay.
Previously, it was thought that in the center here was the Earth. This is the idea of Ptolemaeus. And the sun would be orbiting in a middle falak sphere, which would have Jupiter on one side and Ares on the other side. In other words, Mars. So everything was changed within the century of Shakespeare. This is the picture of the English mathematician who was interested. He was one of the rare people in England who was actually following what was going on, and he translated Copernicus. Spain is an exception. And this is the situation in medicine. Paracelsus, revolutionizing medicine, throwing away the books of Galen and even Ibn Sina. He's throwing away Ibn Sina's Qanun fi Tibb, because that was the best explanation of the medieval medicine that existed. And it was taught, Qanun fi Tibb was taught in all these universities, in all the medical schools. In some cases, right into the 18th century, you could still read Qanun fi Tibb. But Paracelsus was rebelling against it. Shakespeare makes just one brief reference to that matter. Let's look at Shakespeare's London. So here is the size of London in Shakespeare's day. Very small, really. This is 1 square mile. Really a small city. I don't know what the population would be, maybe 150,000, something like that. And where would be the different people interested in science? Mainly around St. Paul's, where there was publishing, the main area for publications, also scientific publications, would be St. Paul's. In this area also there would be things like machine makers, clock makers, people who made scientific instruments. In Lime Street, there would also be pharmacology, chemistry. The Strand, which is here, was really the main center for the modern sciences in London, particularly one house which I will show. In medicine, there were 1 or 2 old hospitals, like the hospital where William Harvey went to work, and that is St. Bartholomew's Hospital in the city of London. Then a famous scientist, of course, maybe the most famous scientist of Shakespeare's time, would be Francis Bacon, who was at the palace. The palace is way over here, around the bend in the Thames, and this area is Westminster. And this is where Francis Bacon would give advice. He was the Lord Chancellor. He was the most important civil servant of Queen Elizabeth. Another scientist associated with Queen Elizabeth, which is relevant to Shakespeare, is a man called John Dee, who was a professor in Cambridge, a mathematician, but he was also a kind of alchemist, kimyai, alchemist, if you like. And he had made various predictions. He was interested also in magic. For a while, Elizabeth I believed in his work and listened to him. As the years passed, she turned against him, and he was not welcome at the palace anymore. So he's an interesting figure. He's particularly interesting from the point of view of the play The Tempest. This is the house which I want to mention in London, on the river, this area called the Strand. This house is the house of Walter Raleigh. We already saw a picture of this man. Here he is, a leading figure, kind of popular hero of the Elizabethan world and Shakespeare's day. You can see that this is painted anonymously in the year 1588. This is the year of the Spanish Armada, the year in which the Spanish tried to force England back into Catholicism. England was in itself, had joined the religious rebellion, which was tearing Europe apart, and it would cause war also in England in the coming century. Early on, in 1588, Spain made an effort to force England back into the Catholic Church, and Raleigh was somewhat involved in that, but more important as far as we're concerned, Raleigh was really someone who was interested in the sciences. And he thought that the Protestant nations would advance the sciences and that the Catholic Church had been holding the sciences back. So he has a kind of Protestant view of the sciences, which was, by the way, shared by people like, in an extreme way, by Isaac Newton later. Okay, so in the area of geography and cartography, we know that Walter Raleigh was interested in new possessions in America and exploiting America for gold and silver. But he was also generally interested in the sciences. He opened his house, this one, Durham House, to mathematicians. They could stay in his house whenever they liked. Also to sometimes foreign cartographers, geographers. They were welcome in Raleigh's house. He cultivated the sciences, very interestingly. And just to show you that in this matter, Shakespeare was up to date. Here is a quotation from Shakespeare from Twelfth Night, Act 3, Scene 2. It says, he, Malvolio, this is Malvolio in Twelfth Night, does smile his face into more lines than is the new map, with the augmentation than is in the new map, with the augmentation of the Indies. This means the West Indies, the Caribbean. Yeah, so saying that Malvolio has all these lines on his face when he smiles, and it's a bit like this map. This is Hakluyt's Map of the World. It's published in 1600. It's more or less exactly the time when Shakespeare wrote these lines. He wrote these lines in 1601, Twelfth Night. Yeah, so on this matter, Shakespeare makes a reference to modern science, which is really up to date. Because the English were very interested in new discoveries and in the potential for exploiting the Atlantic connection. It was a kind of patriotic passion. Okay, so the point that I want to make is that there were many Renaissance discoveries in the time of Shakespeare, but Shakespeare himself shows remarkably little interest in what is new. His references, often in the form of symbolic language, are almost always typical of, if he makes a reference to something scientific or something in the natural world, it will be something typically rooted in the scientific ideas of centuries, the kind of Greco-Roman sciences. I will explain that. But let me say, to put it briefly, the point I'm going to make is this. If Shakespeare were a London building, let us say, he would be the old-fashioned one. He would not be the modern one. Shakespeare was old-fashioned. Why do I say that? Let me show this in the works of Shakespeare. For example, in physics, he refers to the old idea that the earth is in the center. He doesn't bring in new ideas that look, there's the sun going around the earth. This is the old idea, the Ptolemaic idea, and the Aristotelian, by the way. So for example, in Twelfth Night again, Viola refers to the element being between the elements of earth, air and earth. The earth was in the center, the air was around the earth, then came the earth was in the center, then the water was on the earth, and then the air was on the water, and over the air, it was thought, there was a ring of fire. The end of the atmosphere before the moon. It was thought that the world under the moon was the material world. The world over the moon was a kind of perfect world of circular motion and eternal motion. And you find that idea in Shakespeare. It's a geocentric universe, also in his poems. Clearly, Shakespeare is primarily a poet. Don't expect him to be a scientist, although someone like John Donne clearly was interested in sciences, and that he refers to changes in sciences in his poems. But Shakespeare, for example, in this sonnet, and there are many examples I could give, he says, "Oh, that record could, with a backward look, even of 500 courses of the sun." He's talking about the sun going around the earth 500 times, so 500 years, basically. So it's the old world. Shakespeare is not modernizing his ideas. And he's drawing on poetic symbolism rooted in the meanings which had grown up around these old ideas for centuries. Also, he has the physical concept of the four elements. So Shakespeare also believes that the world is made of four elements. These ideas maybe are familiar to you as well, because the same ideas are found in writers like Ibn Sina, in Biruni, in Jabir ibn Hayyan, Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham. They all also believe that the world basically consists of the four elements, because this is what Aristotle taught, based on, as he says, from Empedocles. So these were the kind of accepted scientific notions which existed in the medieval world for centuries. And Shakespeare doesn't question them, really. In fact, he makes references to them in his works, and he draws on them for his symbolism. Here are the four elements. You may be familiar with this kind of diagram: earth, air, fire, and water. This is how people thought that the world was composed. Not of the periodic table as we know it today, but just four elements. And think of it this way. In Shakespeare's work, The Tempest is based on this idea that there are four elements, and that science is basically a matter of manipulating the four elements of the world. So those of you who know The Tempest, one of Shakespeare's last plays, you know that one character is symbolizing air, and that is Ariel, the spirit. Another character, Caliban, is symbolizing the earth, and he lives in the earth. He lives in a cave. And Prospero, the magician, is controlling the elements through his knowledge of earth, air, fire, and water. So Prospero, some people say, is based on the mathematician I referred to who was interested in magic, and he's called John Dee. Maybe Prospero was based on John Dee, who was in Shakespeare's mind at the time. In the area of pharmacology, we have the idea that it's the same in the Arabic and Islamic treatments, what are called al-adwiya al-mufrada, the simple treatments like afyun, opium, or, for example, habbat al-sawda, or other treatments. All of them are classified according to whether they are like earth, air, fire, and water. Are they hot? Are they damp? This is a garden. This is a herbal garden, medical garden in Italy, Salerno, based on the way the medieval mind thought about al-adwiya al-mufrada, the simple medicines, herbal remedies, like, for example, afyun, opium, is a powerful medicine. So it is in al-daraja al-ula, the first degree. It's in the center. The less powerful ones are second degree or third degree. Well, maybe I got it the wrong way around. Maybe the most strong ones. Yeah, the most strong ones must be the fourth degree. So afyun would be one of the very strong ones. Something like lavender is a hot and dry medicine. So you balance out someone with a cold disease with lavender or something like that. You try to always achieve a balance with this kind of remedy. If you want to look at the medieval ideas in the Arabic sources, there is a very good summary called Medieval Islamic Medicine. And you will find the pharmacology, Saydala section, is very much similar to what Shakespeare would have known. In other words, the works of Galen, the works of Dioscorides, the descriptions of medicines as being hot, cold, humid, dry, and in degrees, whether strong or weak. For example, let's look at Shakespeare. He refers to herbal remedies. For example, Iago talking to Othello. He refers to soporific. I think you would say munawim, soporific drugs. Not poppy, which is opium, nor mandragora, nor all the drowsy syrups of the world shall ever medicine thee to that sweet sleep which thou owest yesterday. So these are the soporific. They make you sleep. Purgatives. These are the mushil, the purgative drugs referred to in Macbeth here. What rhubarb, cyme, this is based on the Arabic word sana, or what purgative drug would scour these English hens. So, and you have a very typical attitude to pharmacology in Shakespeare in the character of Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet. Oh, mickle, in other words, great. Great is the powerful grace that lies in herbs, plants, stones, and their true qualities. In Arabic, the word would be khawas. For naught so vile that on the earth doth live, but to the earth some special good doth give. It's a typical medieval idea, and and Shakespeare puts into his play Romeo and Juliet the kind of classic pharmacologist, which is the monk pharmacologist, the monk doctor. We already mentioned that he doesn't mention the modern developments, or only very briefly refers to modern developments in medicine. But maybe the most important aspect of science which informs Shakespeare's ideas are the ideas of psychology, because obviously psychology is the area for the playwright. The playwright wants to show human characters. And in the same way, the medieval idea was that your character is determined by these akhlat, these so-called humors, which is blood, which is phlegm, balgham. Humors are liquids in your body, and the balance of these liquids. Then al-mirra safra, the yellow bile, and al-mirra sawda, the melancholy or black bile. And it's thought that, you know, the blood, the water is particularly associated with watery organs like the brain. The blood is associated with the heart. Melancholy is associated with the spleen and with the gallbladder, the collar, the yellow collar, the yellow humor. And this is going to determine everything in Shakespeare as far as I'm concerned. It's very far-reaching in its consequences. The fact that Shakespeare thinks that the human psychology is based on which humor, which liquid is dominant. So you get some people where, some characters where the earth is dominant. Hamlet, in Hamlet, the melancholy element is dominant. So Hamlet often talks about the earth. He says things like, I don't know, oh, that this too solid earth should melt thaw and resolve itself into a dew, or this, you know, solid comes from the word soil. And even as we know, he jumps into the grave in the graveyard. He jumps into a grave at one point, and he finds the skull of someone he knew, Yorick. So he's often talking about earth. He's melancholic. Melancholy people are generally moody, generally quite quiet, sober. These are their characteristics. And this is the moody character of Hamlet. Look at that, he's referring to the earth, dust. The dust is earth, of earth we make the loam, soil. And why of that loam, he refers to clay and earth. So, you know, Shakespeare has filled this character, filled it up with earth, if you like. Whereas his fiancée, Ophelia, is associated with water. Her brother says, too much of water hast thou, poor Ophelia, and therefore I forbid my tears, because the tears would just add to the water. Some people are associated with the fiery element of the yellow collar, which makes you angry. And in Shakespeare, it's very clear that that's how Shakespeare devises the character of Hotspur. Even his name is Hotspur in Henry IV. Similarly, Laertes, the brother of Ophelia, is a choleric character, very quick to anger. And okay, the sanguine character, someone with a lot of blood, and they tend to be very good speakers, very sociable, active, maybe drinking too much, which is the case with this character Falstaff, who is certainly based on the sanguine or bloody element. So, for example, Henry IV, Part 1, the prince says, I'll no longer be guilty of this sin, this sanguine coward, referring to Falstaff. Similarly, Sir Toby Belch in Twelfth Night, one of my favorite plays, so I refer to it a lot, is a sanguine character. Yeah, there are many references which I won't go through because this is a central element. The influence of science on Shakespeare, the scientific idea that people are divided into the four humours: blood, mucus or phlegm, and yellow and black bile. It's really fundamental to Shakespeare's building of his characters. On the whole, I'm saying, therefore, that Shakespeare is not revolutionary in his scientific ideas. He just takes the inheritance which had been present for hundreds of years. And generally, I would say Shakespeare is very hesitant about the changes taking place in society. You will know that Shakespeare, one of his main themes is kingship and the importance of kingship, not overthrowing the old order. And this is because the dominant philosophy in Shakespeare is kind of what you could call Neoplatonic philosophy, whereby there is an order, a natural order in the world. God made this world in a certain order, and there is an order in everything. For example, there are lots of hierarchies. This is the way the medieval mind and the way Shakespeare also thinks. There are hierarchies. The king is at the top. The king is at the top of the human hierarchy. Below him, the queen. Below the queen, the aristocrat. Below the aristocrat, the lord. Below the lord of the manor, the educated working classes, and then the laborers at the bottom. And these are associated, for example, with the head in the body, with the heart, and with the stomach. But the hierarchy of, there are hierarchies which reflect that hierarchy. For example, the hierarchy of metals. Gold is at the top, then silver. So gold is a bit like the king, and there's a reason for that. Silver is a bit like the queen. Something like iron is like the soldiers in the society. Iron is associated with war. And the god and the planet, Mars, which is the god of war. So these are ancient, from Greek times, ideas of hierarchies, Neoplatonic ideas. And there are correspondences. For example, the king is a bit like gold, the basis of wealth for the whole nation. It also shines like the sun, so that the king is a bit like the greatest of the planets, the sun, which shines gold in color, or the lion amongst the creatures, which is also gold in color. You know, there are all these correspondences. And for Shakespeare, they are not there by accident. Everything has a reason and a so-called teleology, an end, a reason, a purpose. This is a message from God that you know, you've got to respect the hierarchies, and you've got to respect the wisdom which is present in creation. And Shakespeare is fond of that idea. He is rather opposed to revolutionary change. And this is the most famous defense of the hierarchy system in Shakespeare. It comes in Troilus and Cressida, speech of Ulysses: the heavens themselves, the planets, and this center observe degree, priority, and place. Insist your course, proportion, season, form. So everything in the earth, all the natural world is in an order. And don't break that order, says Ulysses, because look what he says: take but degree away, untune that string, that harmony. You take away the string from the instrument, produces lack of harmony. And hark what discord follows. I can see an interesting comment coming up there. We'll talk about that soon. I'm coming to an end. So my conclusion is basically that Shakespeare, you can get an insight on Shakespeare's approach to the world by looking at the way he regards the natural world and the sciences. Generally, he's not interested in the revolutionary ideas which are coming up in the sciences in his day. More, he's a poet who draws upon the old and established assumptions and poetic correspondences which dominated the approach to nature for hundreds of years before his time. And typically of that, if he refers to the sun, he thinks of the sun as moving around the earth, even though he's writing 60 years after Copernicus. So there's much more to say and a large literature on this subject, but I hope that I've given a kind of overview. I mentioned also that politically he's a conservative. He doesn't want kingship to be destroyed. Of course, Shakespeare, an old-fashioned man, a bit like his queen, Elizabeth, she tries to make a settlement around these old-fashioned ideas without moving to the new revolutions taking place in Europe at the time. But England, of course, moved on in the 17th century, and the king was killed, and there was a revolution, and even before that time, the Jacobean style meant that Shakespeare's plays went out of favor. The Jacobean plays were more about Machiavelli and the revolutions against kings and upsetting the old order and showing it to be weak, these revenge tragedies and this kind of thing. So the Elizabethan settlement, it was called, to which Shakespeare was closely associated, did not survive long. And here are my references, some of them anyway, interesting things to look at. You might like to look at, like English reception of Paracelsus, what Ibn Sina has to say on medicine, which is one of, as I said, one of the main ways of teaching medicine in the time. Yeah, this is the book I recommended, Medieval Islamic Medicine, Shakespeare in Medicine. It's a classic work by Simpson. Yeah. Okay, maybe I've said enough. Maybe you want to talk about this topic and ask questions. I'll try to answer. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much for this very enlightening lecture. Can you hear me, Doctor?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Yeah. It's wonderful lecture and very, very enlightening, and it's very comprehensive cultural study. It's about sciences, about history, about literature. You said everything about this period and this subject. Wonderful. It's very enlightening. I loved it. Actually, there is a question from one of our audience. He's saying Shakespeare didn't have any education. So how could he know all of these things?
Yeah. Well, it's true. He did not have an education beyond the age of about 15 or 16. He left the grammar school he went to, which was in a small town, Stratford-upon-Avon. And at the age of 18, he was already married because he'd got his girlfriend pregnant. He was forced to marry. Her name was Anne Hathaway. But he left her when he was 18. And he went to London because he was fascinated by the plays and he wanted to get involved in the plays. In fact, he was able to make some money in that way. His father had, by the way, gone bankrupt, and Shakespeare sent money to his father from the money he made from his plays. But, you know, Shakespeare was a popular figure, very active figure in London, and London was not such a big place. And the theatre was the center of attraction, the center of controversy as well. From time to time, the government even tried to close the theatres. Many of the churches, many of the preachers were trying to persuade the government to close the theatres because they were associated with with vice, you know, crowds getting together for all various purposes, but also with mocking of religion sometimes. There are other free ways of thinking. Shakespeare was part of that world, and he met in the theatre important people. For example, he met the Earl of Southampton. What's his name? Wriothesley. And that was one of the most important aristocrats in England at the time. And that gave him access to other people. you know, Shakespeare was part of the world. It was a melting pot of ideas. And so he learned it by himself, not without going to school. The theater was his school. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. There is another question.
He loved Christopher Marlowe.
Yeah.
And Christopher Marlowe was an educated man. He had been to university, although Christopher Marlowe spent most of his time at university ignoring his lectures and just reading poetry. Yeah, please, another question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. There is another question from our audience. He says that did Shakespeare borrow anything from the Turkish culture? I think it was the heyday of Turkish at this time, Turkish things.
It was. And yeah. And often Shakespeare refers to Turkey as a kind of major threat, because, as you say, Turkey was powerful. Turkey had captured the island of Cyprus, and yeah, it was a time when it looked like, especially in the time of his father Suleiman, or you know, in Henry VIII's time, Suleiman looked as if he was going to conquer even Vienna, one of the major cities of European history. Yeah, so there are references to Turks, but really Shakespeare owes a lot to an older period of Arabic and Islamic culture. And that is the time of Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd, because these two authors had a big impact on European civilization. I'm referring to these medical works. Many of these medical works were translated from Arabic into Latin during the Middle Ages, and the Europeans got to know them through Arabic. Also philosophy. The Europeans got to know Aristotle in more depth because they translated the commentaries of Ibn Rushd on Aristotle. And there were some areas where really Arabic science was dominant, even in Shakespeare's time. One is astronomy, which is why when Shakespeare refers to the names of stars, he may mention some Arabic names. There are Arabic star names like Algol, which is from Al-Ghul, or Vega, which is from Al-Waqi'a, because the star looks as if it's falling away from the pole star. And there is another star name called At-Tayr, maybe you know it. The bird, in English it's called still Al-Tayr. Yeah, so astronomy was one of the areas where the Arabic influence is very strong. And in Shakespeare's time, chemistry was always something which was based on, there was almost no Greek chemistry known to the Middle Ages. But what they knew was the translations made from Jabir ibn Hayyan, from also Abu Bakr Muhammad al-Razi. These are the two main Arab and Islamic alchemists, and they provided the basis for understanding of chemistry and the elements that we find also reflected, not directly, but in a kind of second-hand way, in the works of Shakespeare. Yeah. Yeah. So not so much Turkish influence on science, but strong Arabic influence on science. Yeah.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. I would like also to ask you about the idea of Shakespeare being not a real person. I think you do not believe it.
I think that we know quite a lot about Shakespeare, and new evidence is coming all the time. Even in the year 2005, 2008, for example, researchers found documents to do with Shakespeare sending money to his father, the one I referred to. You know, his father went bankrupt. The reason why Shakespeare's father went bankrupt was because he was working on the black market, selling wool, which was highly regulated industry and profitable industry in Britain for hundreds of years. So Shakespeare's father got involved in this trade in order, to make a profit. But the government caught him and fined him hundreds of pounds, which in those days would be a large sum. Shakespeare's father went bankrupt. He stopped being the mayor of Stratford-upon-Avon and became penniless. He had to sell his house. But Shakespeare sent money from, and this is all recent, quite recently discovered. So we know quite a lot of detail, increasing the amount of detail about who this person was and what he did. I personally, think it's a weird idea to think that it wasn't William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon. For me, it's sure who the character was. It's well established in the sources. He's a clever man, even though he's not educated.
Thank you very much.
He's an autodidact.
I would like to ask. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I would like to ask you a question about Shakespeare's belief in astrology.
Yes.
Anything about the authenticity of this branch? Let me say it's not knowledge, it's not scientific, but what do you think about his belief in it? I think there are a lot of things about astrology in his place.
There are. Whenever you get a kind of dark character who is fatalistic and who has decided that they have the role of disruptor in the world, someone like Don John in Much Ado About Nothing, or more clearly and more famously Edmund in King Lear, he refers to astrology, and Edmund is opposed to astrology. So Edmund is a kind of revolutionary character, breaking the traditional ideas. Astrology is part of the traditional worldview. Even someone as late as Milton, they believe that the planets and the stars have an influence on our lives and on our fates. It's kind of assumed that that's the case. And if you asked someone from Shakespeare's time, how do you know that the planets have an influence on our lives? They would say, it's clear that the moon influences the tide. What do you say? What is the word for the tide in Arabic? I can't remember. The coming up and down of the waters.
It is. Yes, it is mud. Yes, it is mud.
Yes. That's influenced by the moon. So why shouldn't the moon also influence our mood? Certainly, Shakespeare thought that the moon is going to influence people's mood. Some people more than others. Typically, women, according to Shakespeare, are going to be influenced by the moon. And he would also extend that to the other planets. So yes, he believed to an extent in the influence of the planets upon man, but also Shakespeare strongly believes in free will. So combating the influence of fate and the stars is a kind of more Christian-based idea or religious-based idea that God has put us on this earth to make choices and to choose what is good and to become more like God rather than to go down the ladder, which I referred to, this hierarchy. Rather than we are in the middle position in the hierarchy. We could go up towards the spiritual world, or we can go down into the animal world. We are the one creature with that bridge position. And this means that we have a choice. So we're not entirely, in Shakespeare, influenced by the effects of the stars. It's not fatalistic, but Shakespeare would assume that the planets do have a role. But sometimes you have to combat the astrological influences. And some of the, typically an evil character like Edmund wants to fight against the traditional ideas, and so he's opposed to astrology. I hope I'm clear enough.
Oh, yes, sure. I would like to ask you about another question not related to
Sure.
Shakespeare sciences,
Yes.
about his sonnets, which
Yes.
are 154 sonnets.
Yes.
Is this still the valid number? And what about the addressees, the lady and the guy?
Yes.
And
Yes.
was the idea of patronage still valid at his time till his death? Or did he become an independent person, given the fact that he was very famous and highly respected?
I think the sonnets are generally early works, and he thought of himself in his early years in London as one of the important things that he did would be to write sonnets. And many of the sonnets are written for a young man, as you know, and that's very likely to be the Earl of Southampton. For example, what's his name? Rouse, A.C. Rouse, in his studies on Shakespeare's sonnets, argues that the addressee is the Earl of Southampton, Risley, who was a man who was a kind of playboy. He was an important aristocrat, but he didn't go to the court, and he was criticized for this. He much preferred to go to the playhouse, to the theater, than to the court. So he knew Shakespeare, and it seems that he also sponsored Shakespeare in some way. And yeah, Shakespeare seems to have written poems for him. As for the Dark Lady, Shakespeare, yeah, he's a married man, but he obviously had some affairs. It's been suggested that the Dark Lady was the daughter of the Portuguese doctor called Lopez, who, amongst other things, worked for Queen Elizabeth. But, you know, I don't really know is the fact. I think it's a bit speculative, and I certainly don't have, I'm not in a position to make a clear analysis. Some people think that Shakespeare was homosexual or bisexual. It's possible, it's not impossible, but on the whole, I think he wasn't. Yeah, on the whole, I think there's not enough evidence in that direction. I think that he was, kind of, he had this wife. He'd made her pregnant before he married her. Then he came to London. He had various mistresses. There's much more evidence. He can write to the young man, Risley, in very affectionate terms, but that's somewhat normal for the time. We're talking about a time when it would be normal for men to hold hands or to kiss each other. You know, these are the Elizabethans. They are somewhat more affectionate in their behavior than the modern English, who are famously rather cold and distanced. But it wasn't the case with the Elizabethans. So I think that the affectionate terms expressed about the young man can be explained by the Elizabethan style of the day, which would be to express strong attachments in affectionate terms. He's recommending that the young man get married, isn't he? He's repeatedly recommending that young man gets married. And that's because the Earl of Southampton was refusing the request of his family to get married. I don't think there's anything really more in it than that. Those are my views. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think the English are a bit too cold, maybe. Maybe we should learn from our Elizabethan ancestors and heat ourselves up a little bit, warm ourselves up a little bit. Bit more humane. Yeah. Yeah. please.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you very much. There is a question which is very broad, but because it is written by someone from our audience, it is about his idea about women. I think much has been written in this respect, especially from feminist writers, about Shakespeare's idea about women. Can you say something about this? We almost know this subject, but what would you say about it?
Yeah, I mean, there are various psychological interpretations of Shakespeare. Quite often you get the relationship father-daughter and the mother is absent. We don't really know why. But Freud thought that Shakespeare had an Oedipus complex about his mother. So he kind of, well, this is Freudian interpretation to which I don't subscribe, but Freud and Freud's follower, who was called Jones, the first one to write on Oedipus complex in Shakespeare, said that Shakespeare had an Oedipus complex. In other words, he loved his mother in an abnormal way. So that's why Hamlet, which is a kind of seen as autobiographical to an extent, has this clash with his mother, and why Prospero has a daughter, but there's no sign of Prospero's wife. She's died. Or similarly, Pericles, Miranda, or there are other examples, father, daughter, and absent mother, the absent mother in Shakespeare. You know, so there are various psychological interpretations that one can make of how Shakespeare regards women. There are famously a lack of really attractive roles for women in Shakespeare. There is Lady Macbeth. To an extent, there's Desdemona, although she's maybe not a very complex character. The women tend to be a bit passive. But there is also maybe an explanation for that in this respect. It was forbidden for women to be on the stage in London. That is something that the religious authorities of the day certainly insisted on. No women on the stage. So Shakespeare had to use men all the time. And naturally, he was giving the main roles to male roles. So there may be just a simple explanation like that. You can see that I like to take a kind of historical view of Shakespeare and try to put him in his historical context. But I don't always have a clear opinion, like exactly how Shakespeare regards women. It's not something I know particularly. I haven't thought about it very much. I don't take a Freudian approach.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question about his relationship. You said something about his relationship with Christopher Marlowe. Do you think, from your study of Shakespeare, if Marlowe could live longer, do you think that he could have become the greater writer will be?
Yeah. I don't think so, because Marlowe, his plot is less complex. Marlowe is fascinated by one dominant, usually quite powerful and maybe rather evil character, like Tamburlaine or Edward or the Jew of Malta. These are kind of evil geniuses. Violent character. Marlowe's interested in violence. His poetry is rich, and he also wrote in blank verse. And this is what Shakespeare copied. Sometimes line by line, Shakespeare follows Marlowe, and you can hear Marlowe in Shakespeare. But to be frank, The Jew of Malta by Marlowe is nowhere near as attractive a play as Shakespeare's copy of the play, which is The Merchant of Venice, which is also about a Jew in the Mediterranean with a daughter losing his money. You know, Shakespeare's taken the idea from Marlowe, but he's gone much further, and it's a much more attractive play. So yes, Marlowe is greatly important. And when Marlowe died, Shakespeare makes a reference, which seems to be to Marlowe, about the death of the good shepherd, his shepherd, the one who led him into poetry and into the writing in the style of blank verse. But you know, Marlowe is an interesting writer, but Shakespeare is much more attractive. And I think, you know, in many ways, he's got more dimensions to his writing than Marlowe. So I don't think that Marlowe would have compared in the end.
Oh yeah, I do totally agree with you regarding this point. There is no way to compare the greatness of Shakespeare with Christopher Marlowe, despite the fact that he died early. Maybe he could have become a great writer, but I don't think that he will match Shakespeare. Doctor, I think we are now done. We don't have questions.
Yeah.
Do you like to say a last word? We are very grateful to you, and it's very enjoyable, and it contains lots of things we have never read in books, to tell you the truth. Everything was new to us. Thanks for connecting the West with the East, and the idea of alchemy and the Arabic culture, and everything regarding the atmosphere where Shakespeare, international atmosphere where Shakespeare was living in. Wonderful lecture. Thank you very much, Doctor. Do you like to say anything?
You're very welcome, and I will just conclude by thanking you again. And it's really a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak to you. And I have many happy memories of lessons with my Iraqi students, especially when I was teaching in Ankara. I had many Iraqi students, and it was really a great pleasure for me. And
thank you very much.
I had the pleasure of going to Iraq, but a long time ago.
Okay.
And, you know, I have many happy memories associated with going there. And I wish you very well.
We wish you very well too. Thank you very much. And very happy that you have accepted our invitation and you gave us such enlightening lecture. Thank you very much and good night. I would like also to thank my audience. And sorry, Doctor, for the inconvenience we caused you because of the poor internet signal around me here. Yeah, thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye to everyone. And thank you, Dr. Wafaa, especially.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. Bye-bye.
May I ask you, Ms. Wafaa?